The resurrection of Jesus is one of the central pillars of the Christian faith, representing an event of profound theological and spiritual importance. According to the New Testament accounts, after being crucified and buried, Jesus of Nazareth rose from the dead on the third day. This event, celebrated by Christians worldwide as Easter, not only symbolizes Jesus' victory over death and sin, but also serves as the promise of eternal life for all who believe in him. Many people, even after reading the Bible, cannot see the concrete evidence that Jesus really rose from the dead. But in this video, I want to show you 5 pieces of evidence that will dispel all your doubts. Follow the reasoning. Jesus of Nazareth, a Jewish itinerant preacher in the region of Galilee and Judea in the 1st century, was crucified under the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. His death was instigated by the Jewish religious leaders of the time, who saw him as a threat to the religious and social status quo. After his death, Jesus was buried in a tomb provided by Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin who secretly followed Jesus' teachings. 3 days after his crucifixion, according to the Gospels, Jesus' tomb was found empty by some women who had come to anoint his body. Angels appeared to them, announcing that Jesus had risen. Subsequently, Jesus appeared to several of his disciples, demonstrating that he was alive, though with a glorified and transformed body. These post-resurrection encounters were fundamental in the formation and strengthening of the faith of Jesus' early followers. The first piece of evidence is undoubtedly the number of accounts found in the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. The story of Jesus' resurrection is told in the 4 Gospels of the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These accounts are detailed, mentioning dates, locations, and witnesses, providing a rich basis for investigating the facts. Each gospel offers a unique perspective, but they all agree on the main events. Book of Matthew author. Matthew, also known as Levi, was one of Jesus' 12 apostles. He was a tax collector before being called by Jesus. Resurrection account, location, Matthew 28. Main events: the visit of the women to the tomb. Matthew reports that Mary Magdalene and another Mary went to see the tomb at the end of the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week. The earthquake and the angel. There was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, rolled back the stone, and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was white as snow. The appearance of Jesus to the women. As the women were going to tell the disciples, Jesus appeared to them and told them to inform the disciples that he would meet them in Galilee. The bribery of the guards. Matthew is the only one who reports that the guards were bribed by the religious leaders to spread the story that the disciples had stolen Jesus' body. Book of Mark. Author Mark, also known as John Mark, was a companion of Peter. Ancient tradition holds that his gospel was based on Peter's testimony. Resurrection account, location, Mark 16. Main events: the visit of the women to the tomb. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went to the tomb at dawn on the first day of the week to anoint Jesus' body. The young man in white. They found the stone rolled away, and upon entering the tomb, saw a young man dressed in white who told them that Jesus had risen and that they should tell the disciples, especially Peter. The reaction of the women. The women fled from the tomb, trembling and astonished, and said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Book of Luke. Author. Luke, a physician and companion of the Apostle Paul, was not a direct eyewitness, but investigated everything carefully, as mentioned at the beginning of his gospel. Resurrection account, location Luke 24. Main events: the visit of the women to the tomb. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and other women brought spices to the tomb and found the stone rolled away. The two men in dazzling apparel, two men in dazzling clothes appeared and told the women that Jesus had risen. Peter visits the tomb. Peter ran to the tomb and saw only the linen cloths, marveling at what had happened. The disciples on the road to Emmaus. Jesus appeared to two disciples on the road to Emmaus who recognized him when he broke the bread. The appearance to the disciples in Jerusalem. Jesus appeared to the disciples in Jerusalem, showed them his hands and feet, and ate fish with them to prove he was not a spirit. Book of John author. John, also known as the beloved disciple, was one of the 12 apostles and had a close relationship with Jesus. The resurrection account, location, John 20-21. Main events: Mary Magdalene's visit to the tomb. Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been removed. Peter and John run to the tomb. Mary Magdalene told Peter and John, who ran to the tomb. John arrived first, but Peter went in and saw the linen cloths and the folded napkins separately. The appearance to Mary Magdalene. Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene in the garden. Initially, she did not recognize him, but upon hearing her name, she realized it was Jesus. The appearance to the disciples. Jesus appeared to the disciples in a locked room and showed them his wounds. Thomas. 8 days later, Jesus appeared again when Thomas was present. Thomas touched Jesus' wounds and believed. The appearance at the Sea of Galilee. Jesus appeared to the disciples at the Sea of Galilee and performed a miracle of a great catch of fish. He also had a significant conversation with Peter about his future role. The 4 gospel accounts agree on the main facts. Jesus was judged, crucified, buried on the same day, and rose on Sunday. However, each gospel adds unique details, offering a more comprehensive view of the event. Diversity of details. The diversity in the details of the Gospels indicates that they did not merely copy from a single source, but each author wrote from their own experience or information obtained from eyewitnesses. Different perspectives. Each Gospel offers a different perspective, enriching the overall narrative and providing a more comprehensive view of the events. After the resurrection, the leaders of the early churches gathered to evaluate the available accounts. They sought those with verified origins from close witnesses of Jesus and the apostles. Acceptance criteria. The accepted accounts were those that could be verified as coming from eyewitnesses or reliable sources close to the events. Exclusion of less reliable accounts. Accounts that could not be verified or contained significant inconsistencies were excluded from the biblical canon. There are also historical testimonies from secular people who were not Christian believers and had no interest in propagating the faith. Therefore, scholars cite these testimonies to give more credibility to the existence of Jesus Christ's resurrection. Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian who mentioned Jesus in his works, corroborating the historical existence of Jesus and the belief in his resurrection among early Christians. Tacitus, a Roman historian who also referenced Jesus and the persecution of Christians, indicating the prevalence of belief in the resurrection from the early years of Christianity. The detailed and independent accounts from the 4 Gospels, along with the careful investigation by early church leaders and external historical testimonies, provide a solid foundation for faith in Jesus' resurrection. These accounts not only agree on the main events, but also complement each other with unique details, strengthening the credibility of the narrative and offering a rich and multifaceted view of the resurrection. The second piece of evidence is Jesus' death itself. Many say that Jesus did not die, claiming that some people saw him alive. But this is simply not true. The death of Jesus is a central event in Christian history, without which the resurrection would not have occurred. The crucifixion of Jesus was a brutal and excruciating process carefully documented in the Gospels. Understanding the details of his death helps us appreciate the depth of Jesus' sacrifice and the impossibility of his surviving the crucifixion. Before being crucified, Jesus was subjected to flagellation, a brutal form of punishment involving whipping with a flagellum, a whip with multiple leather strips, often with pieces of bone or metal at the tips. This procedure, described in Matthew 27:26, was known to be so severe that it often resulted in the victim's death even before the crucifixion. Jesus was taken to the Praetorium, the Roman headquarters. He was tied to a pillar and whipped repeatedly. The flagellation caused deep lacerations, significant blood loss, and extreme pain, leaving the victim in a critical state. After the flagellation, Jesus was forced to carry his own cross to the place of crucifixion, called Golgotha, meaning place of the skull. This route, known as the Via Dolorosa, was a painful and exhausting walk for anyone, especially for someone who had already suffered so much. Due to the severity of his wounds, Jesus could not carry the cross alone. Simon of Cyrene was compelled by the soldiers to help. Mark 15:21. Crucifixion was one of the most painful and humiliating forms of execution used by the Romans. The process involved nailing or tying the victim to a wooden cross and leaving them to die from asphyxiation, dehydration, and exposure. Jesus was nailed to the cross through his hands and feet, fixing him to the cross. The cross was lifted and positioned, leaving Jesus suspended between heaven and earth. Death by crucifixion could take hours or even days, depending on the victim's resistance. Jesus' agony on the cross was intense and prolonged. He hung on the cross for about 6 hours, from the 3rd hour of the day until the 9th hour, 3 p.m., as recorded in Mark 15:25 and 33. To ensure Jesus was truly dead, the Roman soldiers performed a check. Normally, they would break the legs of those crucified to hasten death, but when they came to Jesus, they saw he was already dead. One of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, resulting in blood and water flowing out, John 19:33-34. This is consistent with the separation of blood and plasma that occurs after death, confirming Jesus was dead. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin who was a secret disciple of Jesus, requested Jesus' body from Pilate for burial. Pilate consented, and Jesus was taken down from the cross and placed in a new tomb. Jesus' body was placed in a tomb carved out of rock belonging to Joseph of Arimathea. Several women who followed Jesus, including Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, observed where he was buried. Various people, including Jesus' enemies and his followers, were present during his crucifixion and death. The Jewish religious leaders were present, ensuring that Jesus was dead. Some women, like Mary Magdalene, witnessed the events to the end and saw the burial. They returned on Sunday to anoint Jesus' body, knowing exactly where he had been buried. Jesus' death on the cross was a public event, witnessed by many people, including enemies and followers. The severity of his flagellation, the agony of the crucifixion, and the final check with the spear ensure that Jesus could not have survived. The burial was carefully observed, making it impossible to misidentify the tomb on Sunday. These details provide a solid basis for the certainty of Jesus' death, which is essential for the belief in his resurrection. The third piece of evidence is the disappearance of Jesus' body. The empty tomb is a cornerstone of belief in Jesus' resurrection. After his death, Jesus was buried in a new tomb guarded by Roman soldiers. On the 3rd day, his body disappeared, leading to different interpretations of what could have happened. Biblical narratives, Efforts to prevent body theft and the reactions of the disciples and enemies provide a rich tapestry of details about this crucial event. The religious leaders, fearing that Jesus' disciples might steal the body and claim a resurrection, requested a guard from Pilate to watch the tomb. Detachment of soldiers. Pilate agreed and sent a detachment of soldiers to guard the tomb. Seal on the stone. The soldiers sealed the stone, an additional measure to ensure the tomb was not breached. On the morning of the third day, Mary Magdalene and other women went to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body, but found the stone removed and the tomb empty. First witnesses. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Joanna, and other women went to the tomb at dawn and saw that the stone had been removed. Angels. 2 angels appeared to the women, announcing that Jesus had risen. Report to the disciples. The women ran to tell the disciples, and Peter and John went to the tomb to check. They also found the tomb empty, with the linen cloths left behind. The soldiers guarding the tomb were terrified by what happened. According to Matthew, there was a great earthquake, and an angel of the Lord descended, rolled back the stone and sat on it. The soldiers trembled with fear and became like dead men. Report to the religious leaders. The guards went to inform the chief priests of everything that had happened. Bribery. The religious leaders bribed the soldiers to say that Jesus' disciples had stolen the body while they were asleep. Some religious leaders claimed that Jesus' body had been stolen, but the claim that the disciples stole Jesus' body is surrounded by contradictions and improbabilities. Improbability of the soldiers' sleep. It is highly unlikely that several trained soldiers would fall asleep on duty, especially knowing that the penalty for sleeping on the job could be death. Moreover, removing a large stone without waking any soldiers is even more improbable. Disorganization of the disciples. Jesus' followers were demoralized and disorganized after his death. The idea that they could plan and execute a body theft facing armed Roman soldiers in such a short time is extremely unlikely. Lack of interest from other groups. There was no other group or faction with a motive to make the body disappear. The religious leaders wanted the body in the tomb to prevent claims of resurrection, and the Romans had no reason to interfere. Fourth evidence of the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. Eyewitnesses. The appearances of Jesus after his resurrection are one of the fundamental pillars of Christianity, providing substantial evidence for the claim that he truly rose from the dead. The witnesses of these appearances not only saw Jesus, but also interacted with him in ways that exclude natural explanations like hallucinations. Mary Magdalene was one of the first to see the resurrected Jesus. She and other women had gone to the tomb to anoint Jesus' body, but found the tomb empty. Mary stood outside the tomb, crying. Jesus appeared to her and called her by name. Initially, she did not recognize him, thinking he was the gardener, but when he said her name, she realized it was Jesus. Jesus appeared to other women as they were on their way to tell the disciples about the empty tomb. He greeted them, and they came to him, clasped his feet and worshipped him. Appearances to the disciples. Jesus appeared several times to his disciples after the resurrection, providing convincing proof of his identity. 2 disciples were walking to the village of Emmaus, discussing recent events. Jesus joined them, but they did not recognize him immediately. He explained the scriptures to them, and when they sat down to eat, he broke the bread, and their eyes were opened. They then recognized it was Jesus, and he vanished from their sight. On the same day, Jesus appeared to the apostles, except Thomas, who was not present. They were gathered with the doors locked for fear of the Jews. Jesus appeared among them and said, "Peace be with you." He showed them his hands and side where he had been wounded, and the disciples rejoiced at seeing the Lord. Thomas, who was not present during the first appearance, doubted the resurrection and said he would only believe if he saw and touched Jesus' wounds. 8 days later, Jesus appeared again to the apostles, this time with Thomas present. He invited Thomas to touch his wounds, and Thomas exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." Jesus also appeared to more than 500 people. Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, mentions that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at once. This is one of the most significant testimonies due to the large number of people involved. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. 1 Corinthians 15:6. This appearance is particularly significant because many of these witnesses were still alive when Paul wrote this, being able to confirm the event's truth. In addition to the 500, Jesus also appeared to James, his half-brother, who initially did not believe in him. This appearance seems to have been a turning point in James's life, who later became a prominent leader in the Jerusalem church. Jesus specifically appeared to James, as mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15:7. This event likely had a profound impact on James, leading him to become a fervent believer and leader in the early church. Jesus appeared to Paul. The appearance of Jesus to Paul, then Saul of Tarsus, is one of the most dramatic. Saul, a persecutor of Christians, was on his way to Damascus to arrest Jesus' followers when he had a vision that completely changed his life. Saul saw a bright light from heaven and heard Jesus' voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" He fell to the ground and was blind for 3 days, until Ananias, a disciple in Damascus, prayed for him and his sight was restored. This event led to Paul's conversion and his mission as an apostle to the Gentiles. The post-resurrection interactions of Jesus with his followers include events that exclude the possibility of hallucinations. Jesus encouraged the disciples to touch him and examine his wounds. He also ate with them, proving he was not a spirit or hallucination. Jesus' conversations with his disciples were rational and coherent. He explained the scriptures and gave them clear instructions, characteristics that are not common in hallucinations. Many of those who witnessed the resurrection of Jesus were willing to die for their faith. The willingness to face death for their beliefs is a strong indicator of the truthfulness of their testimonies. Peter, who denied Jesus before the crucifixion, became a courageous leader and was martyred in Rome. Other apostles also faced persecution and death for proclaiming Jesus' resurrection. James, the brother of John, was killed by Herod Agrippa. James, the brother of Jesus, was also martyred. The appearances of Jesus after his resurrection were numerous and involved physical and behavioral interactions that exclude natural explanations like hallucinations. The testimony of more than 500 people, including women, apostles, and even opponents like Paul, provides a solid basis for belief in the resurrection. The willingness of these witnesses to die for their faith is a powerful testament to the authenticity of their experiences. The rapid expansion of Christianity centered on Jesus' resurrection in a hostile environment suggests that early Christians had a profound belief in their experiences and testimonies. The fifth and final evidence of Jesus' resurrection, archaeological evidence, Jesus' tomb, Holy Sepulchre. The site of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem is believed to be the location of Jesus' tomb. Archaeologists have found evidence of a tomb dated to the 1st century, aligning with the biblical description. In 2016, the tomb was opened for the first time in centuries, revealing a limestone burial bed and a structure dating back to the Roman period. Ossuaries and tombs. James's ossuary. Although controversial, a limestone ossuary with the inscription "James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus," was discovered in 2002. If authentic, it confirms the existence of biblical figures and the use of ossuaries during the Second Temple period. Caiaphas ossuary. This ossuary, found in Jerusalem, is attributed to the high priest who, according to the New Testament, presided over Jesus' trial. This discovery authenticates the existence of figures involved in the crucifixion. Inscriptions and manuscripts, Pilate, inscription, an inscription in Caesarea. Maritima confirms the existence of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus to crucifixion. This discovery validates the historical context of the events narrated in the Gospels. Dead Sea Scrolls. These manuscripts provide context on first-century Jewish practices and beliefs, helping to better understand the environment in which Jesus lived and taught. While archaeology cannot directly prove Jesus' resurrection, historical and contextual evidence supports the plausibility of the biblical accounts. The testimonies in the Gospels, references in historical writings, and archaeological discoveries provide a rich and compelling context for Jesus' resurrection, which remains a matter of faith for millions of people worldwide. The resurrection of Jesus is interpreted by Christians as confirmation of his divinity and validation of all his teachings. For Christians, the resurrection is not just a historical event, but an occurrence with eternal implications. It represents the definitive defeat of death and sin, offering hope of eternal life and communion with God for all who believe in Jesus. Furthermore, the resurrection is seen as the first step in the restoration of all things, culminating in Jesus' return and the renewal of the world. The testimony of the resurrection was the driving force behind the spread of Christianity in the ancient world. The disciples, transformed by the experience of seeing the resurrected Christ, dedicated their lives to preaching this good news, often facing persecution and martyrdom. The message of the resurrection was central in apostolic preaching and the New Testament epistles. Celebrated as the primary proof of the new covenant between God and humanity, Easter, which celebrates the resurrection, is the climax of the Christian liturgical calendar, symbolizing renewal, hope, and the promise of new life. The resurrection inspires works of art, literature, and music, perpetuating its message of love and redemption through the centuries. For us Christians, the presence of the Holy Spirit within us is enough to believe in his life and resurrection, isn't it?